Welcome to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, Minnesota's best political news inside and outside the Capitol. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, a state representative from Southern Minnesota, and with us for the last time this month before he pulls up his stakes in his RV and heads down the road is former Representative Tim Miller, who represented several districts in Congressional District 7 in western Minnesota.
Several counties,
sorry. Yes, several counties. And of course, our guest of honor this hour is Andy Bradrick from Pelican Rapids, deep in Congressional District 7. He is here to try to break down the history of Otter Tail County. And if you've been involved in Republican Party politics, especially at the state level, state central level, you've probably heard about Otter Tail County, or OTC as we call it, and the kind of the infighting that's happened, and it started to boil over and fester in the party, and really was part of the reason why Alex Plekish was put in as chair, because of David Hand's inaction on Otter Tail County. And now we're seeing in the last couple of weeks some more issues with Otter Tail County that need to be addressed as a party. Andy is an Otter Tail County delegate. He served 2 terms as the chairman of the Otter Tail County Republican Party. He's been a Senate district chair. He's been a state central delegate and state delegate involved in Otter Tail County in the Republican Party since 2002, so 23 years. Andy, welcome to the show. I'm
Let me also insert. Yeah. Andy has been sort of a fair player throughout all of this. I believe that, if you want to call it the two sides, he's respected. So I'm thankful that you're on, because I think you're going to be able to give perspective, and we can really, because as you know, Andy, what happens with Otter Tail is it sounds like you're picking a side, and then the other side gets upset. I don't think people view you as that. I didn't think people viewed me as that, but where both sides think I'm a rat at times. So
yeah, I hear that. Tim Miller's an establishment hack. What? I think you've been fairly fair. I just got off the phone with Jennifer DeJournette talking about party business, and they're under a lot of pressure because they're hated from both sides right now. And I said, congratulations in party leadership. If you're hated by both sides equally, you're probably doing things fairly. And so it's a tough position to be in. But the history of Otter Tail County in this mess, I want to try to summarize it because I'm kind of on the outside looking in. But in February of 2022, there was a caucus right before redistricting, and there was a claim that there were additional delegates added to a very important endorsing convention between then state rep Jordan Rasmussen, who was running for the Senate endorsement, and Nathan Miller, who was a conservative Republican, also running for the Senate endorsement. And it kind of came down to a handful of delegates that made the difference in the 60% needed to win. And there was a claim that there was possibly 90 or 100 delegates and alternates that were written in on caucus forms, or it showed up on a delegate list when the forms from caucus night showed that they didn't attend. Is that fair?
Yeah. So yeah, the feeling was the evidence we had was, after reviewing 30 of Otter Tail County's 91 precincts, we found that there were about 30 names that were added, and our request was simply, let's have an audit. This seems inconsistent. We'd like somebody, an independent group, just to go through the caucus documents, compare that to the delegate list that is being sent out by the state party. Let's have an audit, make sure that things are transparent, and let's put this to bed. To our surprise, that there was a lot of pushback to that. In fact, the caucus documents were never brought out to answer any questions or to put these concerns to bed. And so that has kind of continued to hang over the head of issues in Otter Tail County as an unresolved matter.
Okay. And I know that there was a request from a lot of delegates at the time to have the state party chair do like an audit of the delegates, because there was clear evidence that there was some cheating going on for the endorsing convention. Jordan Rasmussen kind of barely won the endorsement. And so Nathan Miller ran in a primary which is kind of your option what you have if you don't believe there was a fair endorsement. And the delegates that supported him, Nathan Miller, in the primary, if they put up a yard sign or whatever, there was some retribution against those delegates. In fact, I believe they were locked out of the next convention because
not to interrupt you, Jeremy, it was not the primary issue. The Jordan Rasmussen won the primary just narrowly by 360 votes over Nathan Miller. Then Nathan he paused his campaign, and then he chose to run a write-in campaign in the general election, which really irritated a lot of people. And his reasoning, and he published this in the local papers, was he announced a month after the primary. He said, Jordan, we'd like there to be an audit of the precinct caucus documents. If you can work together with us to make this happen, I will not run as a write-in candidate. But if this doesn't happen, I'm going to basically have a protest vote and run as a write-in candidate. And it was those individuals who allegedly, there's never been any documentation, allegedly supported him that were targeted and held out of the 2023 BPOU County Convention.
Okay. And in October of 2022, I'm told that the BPOU chair admitted to adding the delegates after the caucus and saying that it was legal to do so because it was a caucus and not an election. It's like vetting people. And so they did admit to adding these delegates to the list, but which kind of goes against the Minnesota GOP rules on how you elect delegates at caucus.
Yep. So Andy, can you fast forward this to the next precinct caucus from last year, and how it kind of, because what you just described there was there's some other things, but we could spend a lot of time getting into the weeds on this. But there was that initial thing, that cycle, if you will. And then this last precinct caucus, there were some things that, and I'll let you describe that, some things that occurred that have brought us through this, and really up until just last weekend's county convention. So why don't you give us kind of that section of what's going on? And then the third part is we'll say how this relates to CD7 just in this week.
Yeah. So at the most recent caucus, there were some decisions made to kind of control the caucus situation or caucus event. Otter Tail County is a very large county, has a very large participation at caucus. And we've had 5 caucus locations in the past. Those were consolidated down to 2 locations, very large groups, very hard to communicate in here. On top of that, the paperwork that was presented at the caucus for participation, the registration forms, not only had a check mark for agreeing with the principles of the Republican Party, but also agreeing with the Constitution and bylaws of Otter Tail County, which many of the caucus participants who were shut out of the convention where those bylaws and Constitution was passed felt that by signing on that they were basically legitimizing the action of the leadership in excluding them. And so they chose to scratch out agreement with the bylaws, and in particular, the requirement in the bylaws that you be in good standing and support the endorsed candidates. And obviously, that's the function of the BPOU and the Republican Party, is to support endorsed candidates. But it really rubbed against the grain and the issues that had been festering. So,
and Andy,
yeah.
And
so,
if you could, the way that I read it was for the people to sign off on those parts of going into, we're almost, I don't know what the right word is, but explain it to me. To the people that were staring at this, they were basically signing a pledge of allegiance to this whole structure that they disagreed with to begin with, right?
Correct. Yeah, good
Yep.
characterization.
So, so you had this caucus, in rural Minnesota. We like to have like one large room where they can address everybody and hear speeches from candidates and things like that. And then we break into small groups to caucus by our precinct, which, like in my case, I was the only person from my township to show up for my precinct. So it was basically a caucus of one, even though we might have a convener that convenes it for multiple groups that are listening. And that's kind of what occurred. But people have to fill out, like, I might be the only person in my caucus. I basically, I'm chair, I'm secretary, and then I've got 2 delegate slots, and then I'm the delegate, and so you fill out the paperwork and you sign it. And that happened with all the precincts in Otter Tail County. But there was some, maybe the paperwork wasn't filled out correctly because the person didn't know that they were the chair or something like that, and they didn't know who to sign. But all in all, there was some question. The leadership questioned the paperwork and tried to invalidate a majority of the delegates, or all the delegates really, from that caucus last year.
And this last precinct caucus was low turnout in most places in the state. That was not the case in Otter Tail County, correct? There was pretty good turnout. There's a lot of people that went there, and I talked to them, and they said, we want to get involved. A lot of them didn't even know what a precinct caucus was before this, but they showed up, participated, and then they were told that things weren't done right, and so it was invalidated.
And part of the reason why there was such good turnout for Otter Tail County last year was because the previous convention, the previous time, people were disenfranchised. So when you were shut out and you're told, well, you guys have to have a majority, you're going to bring your friends and neighbors back to caucus so that you have an absolute majority of people that are like-minded to kind of take over and unelect this board of people that are trying to disenfranchise them. And so, you try to stomp out the grassroots, and they're going to just grow back stronger. And that's kind of what happened last year. And it was clear that if everybody was caucusing and elected delegates, when they had their county convention the next month, they would have, had their way with the board. So in order to stop this groundswell of grassroots support, the Otter Tail County Executive Committee decided that they were not going to certify any of the delegates.
There ended up being no county convention.
They refused to call a county convention. And okay. And then so what was the next process?
So it precipitated into, because you don't have a county convention, this happened, that the discussion was at state party level. I was on the exec board at the time, and it was, there were disagreement in the room. I won't call it contentious, but there's opinions in the room. And what the state party recommended, Otter Tail County went to so to advance on, you advance delegates to either CD7 and or the state convention. And what happened is they took the 2022 delegates and just inserted them into CD7 and the state convention, to which I will tell you, I know exactly what happened at the state party because I was doing most of the talking, and it was intended. I don't know that it was the best thing. Well, there was no good situation there. But anyway, the key thing that to move us forward is after last year's CD7 and state conventions, these delegates were going to be used.
Lost him again, son of a bitch.
Oh, he's back.
You're back.
So the intention is moving forward, they would use those delegates and alternates for future meetings, conventions, basically, which brings us to this last weekend's Otter Tail Convention.
Hang on a second. I got to back up because we're missing a really important thing for people listening. Because a lot of people are saying, well, why are they doing this to the delegates? Why does it matter? We talked about Jordan Rasmussen's endorsement. Jordan Rasmussen was a House member, but he was also a rainmaker for the caucus. He was bringing in tons of money. I think when he first ran for House, he transferred like $40,000 to the HRCC. So the Senate really wanted him to be a Senate member so he could do this massive fundraising. So they kind of preferred him, and there was some reasons why they wanted to put the thumb on the scale for Jordan. The reason why it mattered last year at caucus is because there was a declared candidate running for CD7, Steve Boyd, who was a legitimate threat to Michelle Fischbach. And Otter Tail County, even though it's only one of like 20 some counties, how many? How many counties in CD7? 38 counties in CD7, but this one county has 1/3 of all the delegates for the entire congressional district.
Right.
So if you want to run for Congress, Otter Tail County is where you need to get massive support. And if people are this grassroots support that wants change and wants very conservative candidates is allowed to elect 1/3 of the delegates for the CD7 convention, then it's possible Michelle Fischbach wasn't going to get the endorsement. And Steve Boyd would, because Steve Boyd was very supportive of the Otter Tail County delegates, being seated and all that kind of stuff. So as it started, when they went into caucus, there was a reason why the existing board didn't want those delegates to move on to the congressional district. They didn't want to have a county convention with these new delegates. And so that's really the backstory, what I believe is happening. And if you guys kind of confirm, that's the reason. I mean, is that the main opposition, and why Otter Tail County was?
Well, let me answer first. That's definitely the thoughts of a lot of people. Now, in fairness to, if you want the other side, the other side, what they believe happened, or were being told, is that there was total chaos. It was just wasn't done right. The state executive director at the time, Anna, she looked at it and said, nope, they didn't do things right. There's a lot of turmoil in this. And in my little real quick soapbox thing here is that I continually argued that the intent of a precinct caucus is participation. How can we get people involved? And precinct caucuses are run by volunteers, not only volunteers, but volunteers that have full-time jobs. They're coming into this. They aren't really experienced. They're just trying to get through a meeting the best that they can. And we have to have the attitude of how can we have them participate. So when they kept throwing this at us, and there's kind of different reasons given at different times, it does raise to speculation, what is the intent? And I do believe that this was definitely one of the concerns. I think there was a Jordan Rasmussen aspect. He was not up for endorsement this time, but there was that aspect a little bit. There was also the Congresswoman Fischbach angle. There's also just flat out the people in Otter Tail County.
One important thing in this too is that the chair of Otter Tail County, wasn't the chair of Otter Tail County an employee of Fischbach?
The previous one.
By
the time we got to the convention, they had switched over.
Okay. And it's very important to point out that the chair of the 7th Congressional District Republican Party, Craig Bishop, is also a full-time staffer for Fischbach. He's paid for by the U.S. House of Representatives.
And when we bring this into the current, that's where the concerns are starting to raise up a little bit. But Andy, again, there's lots of angles. So he asked us a question. I didn't want to step on your answer or take your answer from you. What is your opinion? Emphasize opinion, and you can be very specific. You can tell it's a hunch. You can say, I'm not sure. But what was the driving factor from your perspective of what we've seen over the last year in this turmoil that I believe was primarily driven by decisions of that board?
Yeah, I would say very much to protect Jordan Rasmussen and his candidacy. I think he was backed by the leadership of Otter Tail County from the very beginning, before redistricting and before before Tory Westrom was ever redistricted into that district. So yes, it's very much an effort to protect favored candidates against challengers.
Okay. And then do you think that Michelle Fischbach, protecting Michelle Fischbach was the reason why they didn't want the Otter Tail County delegates last year to go to the CD7 convention?
Very much, yes. I believe that was a prime reason, yeah.
Okay. I mean, Tim and I were both at the CD7 convention, right?
I was the rules chair.
He was the rules chair. I was there last year as well. And we saw some some shenanigans going on, pulling all the strings to try to get Michelle the endorsement. And here you have a sitting congresswoman running for the endorsement of the party, and she didn't get it. Even without the Otter Tail County delegates seated, she couldn't get to 60%.
It went to no endorsement. So we could really drag this out. I want to bring this into, so we come into this year, and so there's another county convention. This is the process. The counties have their conventions.
Well, hang on. So there was no endorsement. It went to primary. Michelle Fischbach won the primary, won re-election. So now the threat is gone to Michelle Fischbach. Then we have the state convention, and we had the state convention last year, right? And they still wouldn't seat the Otter Tail County delegates.
No, so yes, but what's happening is so we go into this year. Okay, so last year's, we have the election, we move forward. Counties, for people that don't know, the counties have their conventions, but in the off year, that's where they elect party leadership, delegates moving forward for like state central committee, things like that. That's where this election happens. And so last week in Otter Tail County had their county convention. It was outside. There's this window of time it's supposed to be done in, but the chair Plekish granted it. Let's have this. There's a lot of nerves, but Andy, were you at the convention last week?
Yes, I was.
So why don't you give us a description of give your opinion of what you saw, what was accomplished, because that'll feed us into what happened a couple days later.
Sure. The leadership of Otter Tail County has dwindled so that there is just a skeleton representation of people that are running Otter Tail County Republican Party. And so CD7, they ask CD7 to assist them with putting on the BPOU convention for 2025. CD7 brought in a number of people that helped out with a lot of the different functions in the convention. 62 people were held out of that convention as a process of reviewing those caucus documents and the credentials. In spite of that, the registration and everything went very smoothly. There wasn't any issues, and the convention as a whole was very orderly. It flowed very naturally. People worked together. There was a point in the convention where the rules on seating alternates was discussed or brought forward in order to be voted on, and somebody put forward an amendment changing the language of one of the rules, which stated that the only people eligible to be seated were those approved by the CD7 Special Committee and the State Executive Committee, and the individual making the motion replaced that made a motion to replace that language to include everybody that was elected at the 2024 caucus, including these 62 uninvited individuals. And after some discussion, that proceeded to a vote and passed by a vote of 80 in favor of that to 30 against. And at that point, the individuals who had been excluded were allowed to register and to be part of the convention. My understanding is that was only 12 individuals of the 62 that actually were able to get there in time to be part of the convention. And so this really gave kind of a super majority to the grassroots to achieve a number of constitutional changes.
So it sounds like it took a long time because you were originally going to take an hour to do this convention, but you were there for like 6, 7, 8 hours to get all this work through. There wasn't a ton of fighting. There was just good debate.
Yes.
And the body of delegates really sets the rules. If you have a majority, a super majority, you can suspend the rules. You can do what you want to do, but everyone was seated. Guests were allowed in, and people could participate. And you elected delegates to the CD7 convention. You elected a new board, and it wasn't like the broadsword yielding, grassroots firebrand. It was just somebody that both sides agreed on that would be the new chair of the Otter Tail County. And then you elected state central delegates too.
Correct.
Okay. And did anybody, I mean, were people given the opportunity to object to proceedings or to say, hey, we're not doing this correctly? Or, and then also was my understanding is that the chair and the parliamentarian were chosen by Fishbach staff or the CD7 chair, and the rules were set by him. So, or by his people that he chose. So everything was kind of structured for you to have this convention, right?
Yes, everything was structured. There was a debate on a number of issues. At a couple of points, the parliamentarian Frank Long raised some concerns or objections, and those were responded to from individuals from the floor, and those objections were withdrawn, and the business of the convention proceeded.
Okay. So you had a good convention. Everybody left. My understanding is you all stood up and saying, God bless America. And Tim Miller got messages from people saying like, that was actually a really good convention. And we're healing as a county. And we're moving forward now. Let's go. And I was looking forward to 2026 having, a really good unified party based on just the sentiment coming out of Otter Tail County. And then Tim Miller, you want to explain what you heard?
Yeah, so it began with a friend of mine, a former state representative all the way in Stillwater, and she said, "What's going on in 7?" And she showed me a post by someone that basically said, after all this work, after all this unity, the CD7 Executive Board is going to
meeting.
They called an emergency meeting. And when they first sent me this post, it was just before the meeting, I believe. But the end result is the CD7 Executive Board disallowed all these delegates and alternates that were elected by due process in the Otter Tail County Convention. And I'm just going to jump on this real quick to clarify. Their arguments that I was told they didn't follow the state party constitution with the way they did things. They didn't follow the agenda, so there was flaws in that. And when I argued back with that, I'm just going to cut to the chase. What I argued is, and in the legislature we see this, the body determines what happens. So like when there's rules, they're proposed rules until the body approves them or changes them. And so if there's an objection to anything that's happening, it's raised within that meeting, or in this case, a convention. And if they aren't raised and you have a meeting and you adjourn, everything within that meeting is official. And we saw this, I won't go far into this, but we saw this in the legislature. If someone didn't object to germaneness on an amendment to a bill, it's germane unless someone objects to it. And so what CD7 afterwards, they dove deep in and said, well, they didn't do this right, they didn't do that right. And then they just disallowed it, which did not go over well, as you might imagine. Not to mention the fact that all this healing and goodwill kind of probably went out the window. I haven't been up in Otter Tail. And then it went to the state party, had an emergency executive meeting last night to, I think CD7 went
Well,
to.
hang on, let me just back up. So at the CD7 emergency meeting, they had Jonathan Annisted, who was the chair of the Otter Tail County Convention. He was hand chosen to chair that convention, and he was somehow arguing that it wasn't following the right process. Well, if you're chair, you are there to oversee that process, and if you have any questions about a process or a procedure, you have a parliamentarian with you who is there to govern the rules. So if there's any questions at any
And
time.
Jonathan is a highly experienced parliamentarian. He's
Yes.
been parliamentarian at all levels many, many times.
So there's no excuse that this thing didn't follow order. It's just that the power, Jonathan doesn't work for Michelle Fischbach, and the people that didn't like the results. And so they're trying, I mean, I don't see this as any other way that they're just trying to throw sand in the gears of the party to just tear it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
so
my
biggest issue that just, and this is what has torn me down over the years. I served 8 years in the legislature. I started with the Tea Parties back in 2009. So I've been around since about that time. I did some political stuff back in Iowa when I lived there, but it was mostly here since 2009. And what really drives me crazy is I tell people, if someone's telling you to look at their right hand, you better look at their left hand. Okay. And all of this, I talked to some people in this process, people on the board and stuff, and I go, this isn't making any sense. They had this duly appointed meeting. We always say we're grassroots. We're from the bottom to the top. So if a BPOU approves something, you advance it and move it forward and you respect it. And now suddenly we're not. And when I hear the reasons why, they go deep into this was unconstitutional this and unconstitutional that. By the way, you don't know this, Andy, but at the endorsing convention last year when I was rules chair, I had someone from the Fischbach campaign come to me on 3 different points and say, this convention is unconstitutional for this reason. We need to just have no endorsement and adjourn. And I went to that person. I said, raise it up to the body as an objection. And the body will decide. Well, forget it. We just kind of moved on, because that's the whole point of these processes, right? And what is frustrating, I'm going to guess, I haven't talked to many of them, but everything that I've learned in the last year, what is frustrating to the grassroots is they were told to show up last year at the precinct caucuses. They did. And then there was this false narrative that they were rabble rousers and troublemakers. They kept getting perpetuated. And they're like, if only you'd come to a meeting and be level-headed and let's do this the right way. So guess what they did last weekend? They came level-headed, calm, presented everything. And guess what? I mean, you've been around Otter Tail for a long time. The first time I helped Lee Byberg all the way back in 2010. And even back then, it wasn't quite like this, but Otter Tail has always been a little bit contentious among its ranks, right? Yeah. I was not there last weekend, but the people that were there, including some outsiders, said, we took a big step forward in Otter Tail County this weekend. And you didn't hear a bunch of people saying no fair out of Otter Tail County. And then suddenly a day and a half later, you hear no fair out of CD7. I thought it was out of line. I reached out to the chair and I told him that. And I said, will you talk to me about this? Or will you come on this podcast? And I did not get a response. Now, I don't want to read into a no response, except for that there was, if the chair is confident in what he's doing, he should at least come forward.
Yep.
And I don't know that that's happening.
And on the same night of the CD7 executive meeting where they disqualified all these delegates, I texted Alex Plekesh, the Minnesota State GOP chair, and said, I had this long thing about how Otter Tail County had this great unifying convention. The party is starting to heal. Go GOP. The team is coming together. And as leader of the grassroots, you should be proud of the work that the Otter Tail County delegates did. And then I hear that CD7 just threw a hand grenade in this thing and blew it up again. I said, please tell me that you're going to address this, step in and, qualify these delegates. And he called me. I think he was at a city council meeting in Wayzata. He called me afterwards and said, I'm really upset with this decision. It is not the outcome that I want. And he said, there's going to be a state executive emergency meeting tomorrow. I said, great. I hope you can address this. And he said, well, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to go to Washington, DC. And I don't even think Donna Bergstrom there's going to be a couple people gone, but he wasn't going to be there. He wasn't addressing this, I think, the biggest festering wound in the party. And so they had the state executive committee meeting. And my understanding is they brought forward the argument that they didn't follow Robert's rules, or they did it on the wrong agenda item. They elected delegates on the other business because it wasn't on the agenda. And the second reason why they were disqualifying the delegates, because the Constitution says that delegates to the county convention, to the district convention, are elected in even years.
Yeah, can I address that? So
Yes.
I put forward a constitutional amendment to change the wording in our BPOU Constitution to mirror what it says in the state party constitution, that if we did not elect delegates to the congressional district convention in the even year, that we would be able to elect them in the odd year in the following convention. And so that passed with a 2/3 majority at that convention. Then Jonathan Annisted, the chair of the convention, said, well, the language says at the next convention, so that means the 2026 convention. And we said, no, the language in the amendment meant this convention, that we could elect at this convention. And that's one of the things that they're objecting to. But CD7 had this amendment prior to the convention. They sent it to an independent parliamentarian to review from Douglas County, somebody unrelated with Otter Tail County happenings, a respected parliamentarian and lawyer, to review this. And he went through the whole analysis process, and he determined that if this amendment was indeed passed, that there would be nothing prohibiting the convention from electing at that convention under other business delegates to the CD7 convention. And that's what we did.
And that's great that you did that. You went above and beyond. I just think it's clear when the party, said, basically the party messed this up above the county, or the leadership messed it up. And so you're obviously having a convention so that you can elect delegates to CD7 for the purpose of electing a new chair of CD7, or having the opportunity to vote for, have a fair election in the chair. Because this weekend, this Saturday, the chair of the CD7, who again works for Michelle Fischbach, his seat is up for re-election. And so there is somebody running against him, at least one other person, and you should have a fair election. And 1/3 of the delegates are being told that they aren't valid and that they can't attend that convention. And that's why this is such a big deal.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have any insight into this weekend, Andy. I've heard little murmurs, but nothing substantive. I talked to a couple people that will be at the CD7 convention, and I kind of said, this is going to be talked about at the convention. And they gave me a kind of oh, you better believe it's going to be talked about, but I don't know what that looks like. I don't want you to say anything that you're not comfortable saying, but do you know anything about what's going to be presented in this convention this weekend to address this issue?
Yeah, I have no idea. I know that there are a lot of other people, delegates from surrounding counties, that are deeply concerned about this, and I anticipate that they will bring up the issue. The Otter Tail delegation will be made up of people, the few people remaining in the party that were elected in 2022. So it's even a sparse representation of the 2022 delegates.
Okay.
Most of the grassroots individuals are alternates and won't be seated until this issue has been resolved by the body.
And so understand, this has been 3 times now. So the first was the convention, to where the endorsing convention back 2 cycles ago, to where people, in coming out of that, people were kind of kicked out of the Otter Tail County party, if you
They were
will.
kicked out. Didn't they call the sheriff and lock the doors?
Yeah, we the sheriff was called. We were had to go find another place to assemble.
Yeah.
Yep. So and then fast forward to the precinct caucuses of last year, and then the people that were there were invalidated, saying you didn't do it the right way. And now, calm, collected, they go in and they go through this process, and it sounds like you guys did a great job, including your motion, to keep this as clean as an unclean situation can be, and people leave unified and they're disallowed once again.
So I want to talk about, for those listening who don't live in CD7, don't live in Otter Tail County, why should you care? The issue, I believe, and most of the grassroots believe, is the central issue here that's causing this, and that it's not going away, is because you have someone in Congress who has decided to hire the party chair to be on their full-time position, paying them $40,000, $50,000 a year, I think, is a staffer paid for by the House of Representatives. And if that congressperson is not reelected, then that person could potentially lose their job. And it creates a conflict of interest because the party chair has to oversee the endorsement process for that position in Congress. And this last time, when someone decided they were going to run for the endorsement, it should have been an immediate call for Craig Bishop to step down as chair, because you can't work for this candidate and then oversee an endorsement process that's supposed to be fair. And what they did last year to the Otter Tail County delegates was a disgrace. Bobby Benson is the chair of the 6th District Republican Party, and he is like $130,000 a year salaried position, being the district director for Tom Emmer. In CD1, our former CD1 party chair, Aaron Ferris, was a full-time staffer for Congressman Finstad as soon as he was elected. He brought him on staff, and he was paying him on the campaign when he was party chair before he was elected. This creates this conflict of interest, and it's wrong at so many levels. And that is what we need to change as a party. It'd be very simple for the party to pass a constitutional amendment that says you can't be on an executive board of a party if you are paid, if you work for a candidate, you work for the House of Representatives or the Senate, federal or state, or if you're an immediate family member of a candidate. That should just, you can't be a member of the executive committee because you can't oversee a fair process, or just having the appearance of that process not being fair, right? Nobody's going to run for the endorsement in CD6 because they see Bobby Benson there as chair, and they just know they won't get a fair shake. And so that is not grassroots politics. That is protecting incumbents, which has been a frustration of so many people in the grassroots throughout Minnesota. But this model is being repeated in more and more congressional districts, and in the establishment, if you will, is being a little more bold every time to protect the endorsements, because Michelle Fischbach had a legitimate challenger last year, and she spent, I would guess, $1 million or more defending, running in an endorsement. And the establishment might say, well, that was wasted money. We should have been spending that money in CD2 to elect a Republican. But instead, Michelle had to waste all this money defending her, her position, on the Republican primary. But the other side of that is to say, well, maybe we should have just let the grassroots in CD7 choose their candidate, have a fair endorsement process, honor the endorsement. Not a nickel would have to be spent in CD7, and we would still have a Republican congressman in CD7.
So, Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would make a takeaway from Otter Tail County's experience. I know you've talked about this on a previous show about how there's a big push to move to away from a caucus system in Minnesota to a primary system, where that system is going to favor those who can raise the money and spend the money. But the most effective tool to counteract big money
I've got about
is organization at the grassroots level, getting people involved, getting people engaged, getting people connected. I think we've effectively, it's taken time. It's been painful in Otter Tail County, but I think we are gaining ground by being proactive in educating people, getting people involved, getting people to understand what's at stake if they do nothing.
So the next step is that this has to come up again at State Central. We're going to have a State Central meeting here in a few months. That is a smaller group, probably 300-400 people, maybe 500 people at the state level from all these counties brought together. And hopefully we can see some resolution there to, support the Otter Tail County delegates from a state level and kind of overrule the state executive committee that voted to support CD7's decision to cancel Otter Tail County, right? Isn't that the next step, Tim?
Well, I certainly hope this gets discussed at State Central Committee, because that's ultimately the forum that these things are supposed to be discussed at length. Big decisions are made.
But that's the highest arbiter, right? That's above
exactly.
the state executive.
The only issue is as it relates to this CD7 convention this weekend, that's going to be been and gone sort of thing.
Well, they could invalidate the convention because they didn't have the proper delegates. I mean, they could do a lot of stuff and have to have another CD. The state executive committee could invalidate the CD7 convention and call for a new one with the Otter Tail County delegates.
Yeah, and that's all true. I take a little bit of a different tact. I don't disagree with any of that. I go back to participation, healing wounds, the relational stuff, making things kind of getting things back on the right track. I'm not against State Central Committee disallowing a CD7 convention, but what happens after that?
Okay, well, here's the better solution. The State Central Committee in 3 to 4 months could vote to change the Constitution to immediately prevent people who work for candidates to be in party positions. So Craig Bishop, Bobby Benson, they would have to resign or quit their job.
Well, and as it relates, so yes, that's something that can be done. But as it relates to Otter Tail County, I've raised a question which people tell me I'm asking a flippant question, but it's a valid question. When are we going to allow new delegates and alternates from Otter Tail County? And what is it going to take? Because each round they've been like, well, they did it wrong this last time. They do it right the next time. And each time they keep getting told that they're doing it the wrong way. At the same time, there's a lot of people that are kind of showing up from the other side and holding positions and stuff. So it just smells, right? Yeah. Like, so what is it going to take? This convention last weekend was run completely by outsiders. I mean, not outsiders, but people that were not within Otter Tail County. And if you were to argue anything, we're a little bit more
non-biased.
Well, but they were a little bit more sensitive to the existing board, to the existing way, sympathetic. That was what
establishment. Is that what you're going to say?
A little more sympathetic to the establishment. So if you were to argue, if there were an imbalance this last weekend, it was certainly not on the side of these grassroots people that got elected. They kind of climbed the mountain and did so with pride and honor and integrity, only to be told it didn't count again for these technical reasons, which in my opinion weren't even accurate to begin with.
Yeah, I might interject just that the State Central Committee can't change the Constitution. Only the State Convention can amend Constitution. State Central Committee can amend bylaws, but can't amend the Constitution.
Yeah, I think you're correct with that.
I think state statute establishes that the highest authority is the State Convention over the party. The State Convention governs in the same way that's reflected at every level. The CD level, the highest authority in the CD is the Congressional District Convention. And so I think it's up to the Congressional District Convention to establish.
So as Jeremy said, As Jeremy said, where do we go from here?
Well,
in your opinion?
Let me just ask you. I mean, I think I mentioned just on the phone, but I asked Andy. I said, when Congressman Jim Hagedorn hired the party chair to be his district director, as Tom Emmer did, and as Fishbach hired the party chair. Do you know the conversation that I had with Carol Stevenson about this conflict of interest? Do you know how that went down? It didn't, because she immediately resigned as party chair because of the obvious conflict of interest. Jim Hagedorn insisted it happened. She insisted it happened. It happened immediately because there is a clear conflict of interest between running the party and being employed by the congressperson. That should, so the state central committee should at least pass resolutions condemning this conflict of interest and saying we're going to pass this next year at the state convention. This has to happen to clean up the conflicts of interest in our party, to actually restore grassroots politics. So, Andy, where do you think we need to go?
I agree. That is the elephant in the room. That's we fight on all these peripheral issues that are thrown up to protect that one issue. But I think we need to address the state party constitution and make that provision that you mentioned, Jeremy, of disallowing anybody that's a family member, anybody that's employed by an elected official from having an executive committee position. I think that would go a long way to addressing the problems.
Yeah, I think it would too. So for those listening, I mean, that's really the direction we have to do. And we don't have to wait for a constitutional change. Call for, if your party leader works for the House of Representatives, works for the candidate, works for a campaign of a candidate, just call out that conflict of interest and say, I know that you mean well, but we need to have free and fair endorsing conventions. And I've seen my share of twisted conventions where the chair refuses to call an endorsing convention, or when there's delegates that show up magically and stuff. Let's just get rid of that stuff and be back to grassroots driven politics. There'll be more active involvement, more volunteers for candidates, probably more money given to the party if the party doesn't support this corruption. So I think that would be really great to move forward in that manner. Tim, any
final comments?
Final comments, yeah.
I don't think so. I think you hit it on the head.
All right, good. Well, we skipped over a lot of the details. We did get into some of the weeds, but I think it was important. So thank you, Andy, for participating.
Thanks,
and Tim. Tim was the former CD7 state executive person, so he's been in this role in negotiating all these things. And I've just been on the outside throwing hand grenades into this mess because it makes me mad. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in for another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. I'll pull up my pocket version here. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it.